graciously agreed to join us today. We have Assembly Member Brian Maienschein and Chief Deputy City Attorney Ferbert. Really quickly, I'm going to go over just the basic job of the City Attorney so we're all on the same page as we go into this discussion. The City Attorney provides advice to the city and its departments, including the City Council of the Mayor, and also prosecutes and defends civil lawsuits involving the city. And the City Attorney also prosecutes criminal misdemeanors and infractions that are committed in the City of San Diego. So, to get started, I wanted to ask the two candidates, and we'll start with Brian. Why do you think that you are most qualified for this job?
Yeah, I practiced the law. I've taught the law. I was an attorney over 30 years ago when I passed the bar. I've taught the law. I actually teach here at the USD School of Law as an adjunct professor. And of course, over the last 12 years as an assembly member of the state of California, I have made the law. I have served on the Judiciary Committee, which, if you're familiar with California state politics, is probably the heaviest load of a committee up there. All the legal issues that affect the state, the civil code, the evidence code, issues with judges, all of those issues that come before our state, especially the state the size of ours. I'm the first person to ever chair the committee from San Diego, and so I think I bring a perspective that's rooted. I served as a city council member at one time, and so I sat in the chair and understand what a city attorney has done well, and also understand what the city attorney has done not so well. So I think I bring a perspective. I understand the city from having been there, and having said that, I've been away from it for a while and bring an outsider's perspective to some of the necessary changes that need to occur this.
I am a Chief Deputy City Attorney in the City Attorney's Office. I graduated from law school here at University of San Diego 17 years ago, and I've been practicing local municipal law ever since. I am the only practicing attorney in this race. My opponent is a career politician. He's had a successful political career for both parties over his political career, and this is not a political job. As you explained, the role of the office is to provide legal advice, and understanding the legal advice and how the law has changed over the last 24 years is critically important to making sure the city officials and city departments are getting solid legal advice to protect taxpayer dollars from waste and fraud, to providing advice on how to adopt new laws and how to defend the many lawsuits that the city attorney's office is defending. So based on my experience in the office, understanding the role of the office, that it is not a political office, I think is critically important for the next city attorney.
Brian, would you like to respond?
Well, yeah, briefly, to clarify the political nature of it, we are running for the job, right? There is an election that's happening. So it's defined by the city of San Diego what they want in a city attorney. The idea behind having it be an elected job is that people get to decide, as opposed to kind of a small back room choosing who the city attorney is going to be. I'm glad that actually the citizens get to decide. In addition, just to kind of clarify, I am the endorsed candidate by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party reviewed both of us. We had to go through a very lengthy margin process before the Senate election. And I was chosen as the Democratic candidate. And I also, just real quickly, I do want to thank boards for diversity and the sponsors too.
I will say, one of the big issues at the race has been your experience, just to kind of discuss that further. I want to invite both of you to talk about the experience issue. I know Heather's campaign, has been bringing up the issue of experience quite a bit, and how much experience you've had practicing the law, since most of the time since you went to law school, you have been a politician. So I want to just get into that because that seems to be, the big issue in the race.
Well, you are correct that she said that a lot. But what I will say is, I think the experience I'm so grateful I wasn't stuck practicing a tiny little area of municipal law for the last 30 years. I'm glad I got to go out and expand my horizons and what I think I bring to the table. If you look at what I've done, I've worked with 2 governors. I've worked with 2 attorney generals. By the way, hopefully one of those people will now be president. They said I worked with the president of the States. Now Vice President Harris was attorney general. I've had these issues that up and down this state, the state is a complicated state. You can imagine it's 4th or 5th largest economy in the world. We have really complicated issues. If you look at what's happened in the city, and I imagine we're going to get to go into this a little bit later, it hasn't been pretty. You look at bad land deal after bad land deal. Every single time the city's involved in a land deal, they're losing. You look at the city's inability to comply with the Public Records Act. They've now lost $250,000 for refusing to turn over documents to the public. This is not a record of success. This needs to change. The chaos that we see at the council, the chaos that we see between the city attorney's office and who they interact with, is not something that should be relegated. I'm proud that the people that I've worked with my entire career, if you take somebody like Tony Atkins, worked with her for 25 years. She's running for governor, by the way. And that's somebody that certainly I haven't agreed with every day for 25 years, but somebody who's seen my character, how I conduct myself, and sees me in that office. So I think that's something that I bring there is a broader perspective away from all the chaos and the dysfunction that we see at the city. And it's time for all of us at the city to see better results.
Heather, would you like to respond?
I would. I find it very interesting that my opponent is trying to run as the outsider candidate when he has had a 25-year political career in both parties and has always been the insider and is endorsed by all of the insiders in the city. I have been a practicing lawyer, and it is not a narrow experience. I have worked with every city department. I have represented outside agencies, and the city's legal work is incredibly complicated. And it varies from prosecuting misdemeanors to keep our women and children and families safe in our communities, to protecting housing, to making sure that contractors who try to defraud the city are held accountable. And I was successful at recouping over $2 million from one of those contractors pretty recently. And it is because of my depth of legal experience and knowledge of the city government and how the city works, the players at the city, and how it works. It's very different than Sacramento. The city of San Diego is a complicated system, and the city attorney is intentionally an elected position to ensure independence. And that independence ensures that the city attorney is elected by voters to protect the citizens who live here, not just to serve the mayor or the city council or whoever the political whims are, but to be looking out for taxpayer dollars so that those can be used for the city's priorities. And those priorities are set by your elected council and mayor based on what you tell them, based on your votes, and based on your feedback. And if we are having an inexperienced lawyer leading the city attorney's office, millions of dollars will be lost to frivolous lawsuits and settlements, and that money will not be available for road repairs or police officers or housing or whatever it is you want prioritized in the city.
So I'm going to move into some different issues and I think this next one is very much related to what we've been discussing as well. So current city attorney Maura Elliott has sometimes been at odds with council members and the mayor. Things got especially tense at times with the council president. She also spoke out against the controversial 101 Ash Street settlement. We'll talk more about 101 Ash coming up. And issued a pretty scathing memo on the proposed mega shelter lease that the mayor is trying to open up to 1,000-bed shelter in Middletown. These situations speak in part to the unique role that the city attorney has as an independent elected official who also has to respond to voters and give legal advice. How would you approach the tension of those two roles? I'll start with Brian, since Heather.
Yeah, I think it's important that the city attorney be independent. I think it's important that the city attorney stand up and advocate for the people who elect him. I think that's a critical need and a critical requirement in the city attorney. But what I also think, though, is there's a way to go about doing it. What we see with these continued chaos that we see where it's sort of this needless, playground type bickering, that's not particularly professional. One of the roles of an attorney is to meet with their clients and give their clients advice to help them avoid precisely these situations. We see over and over and over again the city losing, for example, I believe now it's 6 lawsuits in a row on Public Records Request Act. 6 in a row to try to keep, by the way, the objective being that the city attorney is signing off is keeping documents from the public. You would think after 1 or 2 losses, you would change that policy. You get to 6, that's $250,000 they're up to now. That could be better spent anywhere. I know we're going to go into Ash Street, and I'll save some of my comments on Ash Street a bit later. But I think there's a way to go about doing it. If you look at the course over the course of my career, the reason I've been able to get, one of the reasons I've been able to get so many things done is I treat people with respect and dignity. I don't go on Twitter and attack people. I treat people with respect. That's something that's missing. You see all these dueling press conferences and all that. And I get that other people may behave like that, and you can't control that, but you can control yourself. You can conduct yourself in a way that represents the city attorney's office well and represents the men and women who work there well.
Heather?
The independence of the office, I agree with your statement. The independence of the office is critically important, and it is to be a push and pull, check and balance on our other elected officials. And most of the time, that relationship works really smoothly. The city of San Diego transacts more business than most of you all hear about every single day to make sure your trash is picked up, to make sure that people are being paid, that transactions are happening, to keep city government working. And yes, sometimes it gets messy. And when it gets messy, it's on big property transactions generally that are going to have long-term impacts on our city that are costly. And that should be messy, right? We want a city attorney who is going to issue a memo so that the public is aware of what's going on and who's willing to stand up to people who may be their allies in the event that they are not following legal advice that might have been delivered originally before. Just like when you hire a lawyer and you're the client, you get to call the shots as the client. The lawyer doesn't call the shots. And maybe my opponent's forgotten this from 24 years ago, but the client gets to decide at the end of the day, yes or no, whether to move forward on something or not. The lawyer doesn't. The lawyer gets to say that's illegal and I won't help you do it, but beyond that, it's the client's decision. So we do our best at the city attorney's office now, and I will do my best going forward to make sure that the client, and that includes the public sometimes, is fully informed of all of the legal risks of some of these transactions that are going forward. And that is what needs to happen. I think the Kettner and Vine model, where a public memo of legal concerns was issued, was the appropriate approach in that instance. The city attorney's office had not received all the information it needed. That was stated in the public memo. And having that dialogue with the council and the mayor in a public setting was important for the public to hear before the city invested millions of dollars over 30 plus years.
Brian, you have said you can come in with a fresh perspective and moderate the situation a bit. Could that also be difficult for you to navigate because you do have those past relationships and endorsements from the mayor and city council members?
Well, I mean, I think the reason why I receive some endorsements is not because I agree with these groups all the time or these individuals all the time. It's actually because I've had real achievements over the course of my career. I've worked with people to actually accomplish something. If I go back to my city council days, I led the efforts on State Route 56, got that done. I led the rebuilding for 2 communities and our 2 most devastating wildfires. I actually see a couple people here who I met during that time period. The model that I created for disaster relief, by the way, we set a national record. The model that I created is now what FEMA uses. I preserved 10,000 acres of environmentally sensitive land. Then I left, created a homeless services program. Instead of going to work and let the council could have cashed in, I went to work with the homeless. By the way, not a great way to make money. But I did get something really significant accomplished. I created Project 25. I know we're going to talk about homelessness later. I can talk about that then. But it's one of our most successful homeless programs ever in the history of the city of San Diego. And then I went to the state assembly again, where during the course of my time in the assembly, I've gotten about 120 bills passed. I believe I will leave the assembly with the most bills passed of anyone in the term limited area, not counting budget bills. And I did that because I went to work to have very real accomplishments. And based on all of that is why over the course of that career, that's something that needs to come to the city attorney's office. I disagree with one thing that Sue said, that we bring the public in, that she thought the public should come in sometimes. The public should come in all the time. Public Records Act is there to provide sunshine and transparency. How many of these terrible deals, it's not just Ash Street. Ash Street's probably the worst, but there's many others. How many of those would have been avoided if the public had got involved? Yeah. If they hadn't been hidden in closed session. One of the biggest things that the city attorney's office tried to get done in Sacramento was a bill to weaken the Public Records Act. Fortunately, myself and enough of my colleagues stopped that, but that was a legislative plan of the city attorney's office. That's terrible. We should be doing the opposite. We need more transparency in this government, not less. We need somebody who understands the value of the public, who has been working with the public on all these wide-ranging accomplishments for nearly 30 years, and not a very narrow, insulated view of how it currently exists, that it just has to be messy. It's always been messy. It has to be messy. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be messy. You can stand up for your viewpoint. You can stand up for the public. You can do all those things in the city attorney's office without burning everything down around you.
Brian has brought up public records lawsuits quite a bit. I'd like to allow you to respond and then have both of you talk about what you would do to increase access to public records.
Public records is probably one of the hardest things the city deals with. The city has over 10,000 employees, a variety of departments, and records are maintained in all sorts of different ways across the departments. It is incredibly challenging to find the records, produce the records timely, and my work on public records, we have always tried to release as many records as possible and do it in a timely fashion. I am in favor of the Public Records Act. I think the transparency is incredibly important, and I would not be in support of legislation to limit the Public Records Act or limit the public's ability to participate in the process. I think that my opponent is trying to accuse me of Public Records Act on lack of transparency because there's nothing else. I have a long list of successful accomplishments with the city. I wrote the eviction moratorium when the pandemic hit to make sure families could stay in their houses even though they couldn't pay rent. I wrote the unsafe camping ordinance to make sure that the city had tools to address the homelessness issue and keep communities at risk of wildfire in schools and shelters safe from harm that might be caused by humans and people living in places that are not intended for human habitation. And I have a long list of working with every single council member on their highest priorities. I am the first lawyer they call when they have a problem and they want to solve it. This office is about solving problems. And a lot of times we're solving the problems that are created by politicians. That includes 101 Act. That includes sometimes Public Records Act issues. And the city attorney's role is to solve those problems, not be part of them and not create them.
Brian?
Well, I would know that the people who have worked with me during the course of my career are endorsing me. The people who've worked with my opponent are largely not endorsing my opponent. The two members of the city council who are both lawyers, who both worked in the city attorney's office with my Ms. Ferbert, have endorsed me. So I do think when we talk about meeting their priorities and helping them get their priorities accomplished, what comes with that is giving them legal advice they can depend on, that they feel isn't being political or personality based. That's what they're looking at right now. If you look at overall at sort of 30,000 feet, what's happening with the city, what all the council members, mayor's office, city attorney's office saying, well, you don't like me, you don't like me, you don't like me. That's why all this advice is happening. That's a terrible way to do business. It's a terrible way. An attorney can never give advice based on whether they like somebody or don't like somebody. That's not what's at issue here. What's at issue is putting all of that aside. We've seen enough of that. We have seen enough of that. We see that every time these council meetings degenerate into kind of chaos. We see these dueling press conferences, these dueling press releases, pointing fingers at one another. If the Public Records Act issue had been resolved, the city wouldn't have lost $250,000. The city wouldn't have lost 5 or 6 lawsuits in a row. And by the way, if you talk to the attorneys who work on those public records and requests, they actually tell you, we wish we weren't having to do this all day. We wish the city would just turn over the documents. It's indefensible to not turn over documents to the public. The public has a right to know. They're paying. You all, everybody in this room is paying for these. And all of it should see sunlight. Just to sit up there and say, well, I support the public record, or I didn't support. It would have been nice to hear that then. It would have been nice to hear it to save taxpayers $250,000 and give them confidence that their city government isn't hiding anything.
Is there anything specific, though, that you would do to try to reform that process?
Very, very much so. There needs to be a policy in place where they're in compliance with the Public Records Act request. It's unconscionable to lose 6 lawsuits in a row with the same exact fact pattern. So yes, there needs to be a citywide policy on turning over documents. That isn't what's happening now. So it's this, hundreds of other government bodies in this state comply with the Public Records Act. In fact, I don't know off the top of my head, maybe there is, I don't know of anybody who's lost 6 lawsuits on the Public Records Act. I don't know of any other jurisdiction that's done that. The city of St. Louis has. What a waste. What a waste. What a tragedy for people in the public who want to get these documents, want to see what happens in their government, and are unable to.
Heather?
In the last budget cycle, the current city attorney went to the council and asked for money to create a Public Records Act department in the city to take over all of the Public Records Act responses for 50 plus departments in the city. That request was denied. I don't know, like I said, if you hire a lawyer and you're a client, the client gets to make the call. If the city's not going to fund solutions to try and avoid these lawsuits, the lawyers are stuck with solving the problem that was created by politicians. And that is about trying to defend those lawsuits and trying to, again, encourage compliance with existing policies that are legally compliant. And a lot of times the PRA, the Public Records Act, is a hot button issue because there are lawyers who watch the city like hawks, and that's good. That should happen. That is important for transparency and for public participation in local government. What's not okay is to have the lack of cooperation, and so the city attorney's office has a coordinated Public Records Act response team. And we took that initiative in the office to try and prevent lawsuits arising out of the city attorney's response to PRA. What we cannot do is fund that ourselves. The city attorney has no budget authority. So I'm not sure how my opponent is going to solve this problem unless he can get them to budget the authority and actually create this department. But that would be a goal of mine. I'm looking forward to working with the mayor and council on doing that and trying to get that department created because I think it will solve a lot of the problems and would absolutely mitigate risk of future lawsuits.
I want to move on to homelessness. So recently, a Supreme Court decision just removed a years-old requirement that cities offer shelter to homeless residents before citing them for crimes associated with homelessness. The city attorney's office, and specifically Heather for now, has been advising city officials on how to respond. Heather, what advice are you giving the city? We'll start with you.
Well, there's only so much I can say because I am actually an attorney for the city, and there is an attorney-client privilege. But writing the unsafe camping ordinance was an incredibly legally complicated process to navigate both the legal questions that were still outstanding because the Supreme Court had not ruled yet, and to navigate the competing policy direction from the council, the mayor, the stakeholders involved in that issue. And that, in my opinion, is the model of how the city attorney's office should handle policy processes. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in that policy, and that's okay. It's not my policy. I did the legal work. I did the legal work that was required to give the council all of the options on what they could do, and they went forward and adopted a policy that found a middle ground that a lot of people have a lot of feelings about. But the legal work was sound. That law has not been challenged yet and actually has upheld survival with the Supreme Court ruling, and it gives the city a tool. How they use it is up to them, but the lawyer's office, the city attorney's office's role is to provide that tool if that's the policy request. And in addition to that, I have spent the last 15 years helping stand up non-congregate homeless shelters, hotel rooms, safe sleeping, which has been hugely successful for the city, and a variety of other services for homeless individuals to help get them off the street. My opponent talks about housing 35 people. That's fantastic. But there's 6,000 people unsheltered in our city today, and 35 people is not enough. So we need to do something drastic, which is why I have plans for a housing protection unit to prevent homelessness. Senior citizens are one of our fastest growing populations of homeless individuals because they are being priced out of the market. Their rents go up and they are on fixed incomes and they can't continue to afford it. It's horrible. People who have successfully housed themselves, worked, and had their lives here should be able to retire and not worry about whether to choose between rent or dinner or their medication. And so I have a plan to protect and preserve housing that exists today. It's normally our most affordable housing in our communities, and it's really important that we do that by making sure that the city attorney's office and the city's code enforcement are working collaboratively to enforce rules like the short-term rental ordinance, the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit rules that prohibit the use of those as Airbnbs, and putting other more affordable housing back into the market for our families, for our seniors, for the people who live here.
Brian, what advice would you give to the city on Grants Pass?
Well, I am happy that we finally have some clarity on this. We've been floating around at the Boise Grant Pass, the city not having effective guidance. City does now have. City's got a lot of options that they can take, and that's up to them as policymakers. I do want to talk about the homeless program that I created. I created Project 25. We took the 38 most expensive to taxpayers homeless individuals and got them into housing and services. These were people had to get about 40 different agencies to share data. You can imagine how complicated, the government agencies, charities, we had to get through HIPAA, very complicated. So we could rank how expensive each one of these homeless individuals were. These are people who are now self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. One of them, for example, have been homeless since the Vietnam War. So these are the hardest people to get housed by far. These aren't like waiters or waitresses who are, based on how the economy goes. They're kind of on that end of the spectrum. These are the people, somebody who's been homeless since the Vietnam War, as you can imagine, is somebody very problematic to getting housed. They now have drug, alcohol problems, a lot of issues. I got them into housing. I got the city to donate housing vouchers. I got the county to donate services. I got the United Way to pay for case managers. We got them into housing. They started saving millions of dollars and we ended their homelessness. And I will tell you, and this is one thing I've learned, not just in politics, you will get criticized when you do good things. With all due respect, to sit and say, well, he's housed 38 people and that's not very good. Somebody who's housed 0 is not acceptable. That's what we have to deal with so often in politics. You get out there, you give years of your life, you create a program by any stretch. Is successful. Is somebody who didn't do anything, sits there and goes, trolls you online, or does that. I would take that program, if we had that program citywide now, and stretch that out. And by the way, the first 38 are the toughest, right? They're the most expensive. It starts getting easier. If the city would have stuck with that program, we'd be in a lot better shape than we are today.
So I want to ask another Grains Cast related question since that's a very good spot though. Go ahead and respond.
Thank you. I think, yet again, not only is my opponent unsure about the role of the city attorney's office, but also has no idea about my record. I have spent my entire career housing people and housing homeless individuals in our city. I have probably housed thousands of people through my work, and so it is rich to hear that, again, he's just unsure what is actually happening in this role. It's the wrong role for him.
So another, obviously, Grants Pass has been coming up a lot. Even this past week, actually, the Downtown San Diego Partnership released a 5-point safety plan that was especially focused on homelessness. And the coalition behind that wants the city to enact a 24/7 no tent policy on downtown streets and sidewalks, and also to revisit legal settlements and the police department's current multi-step process of offering shelter before citing or arresting homeless people for crimes tied to homelessness. Would you support a 24/7 no tent policy? And do you think that that's legally defensible? I'll start with Brian since Heather just spoke.
I think that's a policy decision for the council. I think it's something that the city attorney's office is going to need to explore. If the council instructs the city attorney's office that that's the direction they can go, the city attorney has an obligation to then try to make sure that it's done in a legal manner. I think what's important to remember here is the city now, after Grants Pass, Boise, the city now has a lot more options available than they had before. This is going to, all these cases, if the city tries that, for example, that's going to be a case, first impression, post this case. So it's going to be something that the city attorney's office is going to have to almost assuredly litigate, or at least advise the council in a way to attempt to avoid as many problems as possible on that. But I do want to be clear about one issue when it comes to this. I think we do have to be careful about criminalizing homelessness. I mean, I think there does need to be services in place. I mean, if you look at a lot of things, I led the effort on Senate Bill 43 on the Assembly.
We'll talk about that.
Okay, so I'll skip that. But I think there's a lot of, I would use that as an example. I think there's a lot of things that the city and the county need to be working together on to make sure that homeless people aren't just being criminalized for being homeless. There does need to be solutions, but criminalizing them really isn't the way ultimately to go. Before Project 25, that's sort of been the strategy, was taking these people who, the guy from the Vietnam War who probably was, getting some public intoxications, who was, not always acting perfectly, but criminalizing him didn't get him into housing services. It took a successful homeless services program to do that. And we can't lose sight in all of this that ultimately you're not going to litigate your way out of this. You're certainly not going to ticket your way out of this. Are those things you can look at? Of course. But ultimately, there needs to be a much more comprehensive plan in place to do something on this problem.
Do you think it would be legally defensible though?
Well, I mean, sitting here today, I mean, I have to research what all that meant. I'm not going to give you an answer to such a complicated question I said here off the cuff. Do I think that would be legal? I don't know, sitting here today. But what I would tell you is we will be on that. And as they develop their policies on this, we'll do it. But I don't think there's anybody who can sit here and say, yeah, I think that this is what the Supreme Court would say on it. They haven't ruled on it. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it.
Heather?
I tend to agree that grants, with my opponent, that grants pass provides the city a lot more flexibility. The grants pass decision took a definitive position on a very specific topic. The Supreme Court said the Eighth Amendment, the cruel and unusual punishments clause, does not apply to cities adopting camping laws. What that means for other types of policies is still not entirely clear. Not only did the majority opinion, but also the dissent laid out a roadmap of other constitutional protections that could potentially apply to laws enacted by local governments to address individuals experiencing homelessness and some of the things that communities are concerned about, including encampments. So I'm very well versed in grants pass, and I'm ready to advise the council and the police department if that's the path they want to go in. Personally, I also agree criminalizing homelessness is not necessarily the only tool or answer to addressing homelessness. Homelessness is a very complicated issue. There need to be as many potential solutions to homelessness as there are reasons people become homeless, and that is a huge variety of why. Sometimes it is PTSD, drug use, mental abuse, mental health issues, and there needs to be a very robust partnership with state and county agencies who help address those things. The city of San Diego and every city government is not allocated any money for behavioral health or mental health issues. That is entirely dedicated and given to the county governments to administer and manage, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize, but it definitely makes it harder when we're talking about a comprehensive issue like homelessness that is so complicated on a case-by-case basis. Outreach workers tell me that they have to talk to the same person months after months after months to get them to agree to one change in their life, whether that's abandoning their can recycling route to go to the doctor, or maybe take a step into a shelter or take a safe sleeping location site. It can be very challenging, and it's because it is so complex and because there are so many different issues at play.
So I want to talk about behavioral health. So under the current city attorney, Mara Elliott, the city has gotten a lot more engaged on conservatorships for people with behavioral health challenges, even actually making referrals itself to the county and the court to encourage pursuit of conservatorships for people that the attorneys deem unable to care for themselves. And in January, upcoming January 2025, conservatorship eligibility is going to be expanded in San Diego County to cover people with severe substance use disorders. If you're elected, what role would you like to see the city attorney's office play on conservatorships? We'll start with Heather.
The conservatorship program in the city attorney's office has been successful. The deputy city attorneys work directly with our fire department to identify individuals who are frequent users of fire department, EMS, and emergency room services. And these are people who the fire department has determined cannot take care of themselves due to mental health issues. And so our office engages in a very robust, careful analysis of the people in their lives, whether there's somebody who can take conservatorship over them and help them. A lot of times the family is not available for a variety of reasons. And then the city actually files a motion in court to compel the county to take conservatorship of that person. And then that, if the county does take that, and the county has opposed every single one of those motions, is my understanding, it means if we're successful in that placement, that person is then the responsibility of the county, and the county conservator will help them find housing, help them access the medical needs that they have, because in addition to their mental health, there's usually very serious medical conditions going on, which is why they are engaging with the fire department and emergency services so frequently. So it is an incredibly important program, and as the next city attorney, I plan to continue to expand that work. And I think on the other side of it, the city attorney's office and the city as a whole really needs to engage the county in trying to put more resources to programs like this, because these are the people we see on the street who really break our hearts. We don't really know, I never know what to do when I see this person. I don't want to call 911 and have them arrested, because that's not the solution. But the person walking down the street who doesn't look like they're going to stay on the sidewalk, they're dangerous. It's scary for their health. And so trying to house those people and help them into better situations is one of my top priorities.
How do you think that the city should be engaging the county on that?
It's going to take a partnership. Ideally, we wouldn't have to sue the county to take conservatorship, and we could have a relationship where we can transmit information from the fire department and the county. We have a conversation, and the county says, yep, great, this person definitely needs a conservator. You've done all the due diligence. There's no family member who can do it. We're on it. And then there's a nice handoff. Right now, that's not the situation, and we are happy to file those motions.
Brian?
Yeah, I think we agree. I think the city has a really good role to play in this area. As you know, I actually went up on one of the things, went back when I was in law school, I clerked for a judge who had the mental health calendar, and I learned about conservatorships. It's a very arcane area of law. Hardly anyone practices there. It's very complicated, very legislative heavy. And so it was one of the issues that I knew needed transforming. I worked on like comprehensive conservatorship reform for a number of years. It was interesting. After I tried to explain it, there were even lawyers in the assembly who didn't really understand it. Actually, after the Britney Spears documentary, that actually helped a lot. And interesting. And I actually worked with her attorney. He and I worked together and got really significant conservatorship reform passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. What I'm excited about what you're talking about is SB 43. Susan Eggman did it on the Senate side, and I did it on the Assembly side. Is this makes larger the definition of what under the law is called gravely disabled. It used to be a lot more complicated to have somebody declared gravely disabled. What we said is there's a whole lot of ways you can actually in practice for the person you feel bad about, for the person you see on the street corner who clearly has a number of issues. It's very difficult to get into housing. It used to be you had to have multiple issues, very, very, very hard. Family members wanted to get their family member considered gravely disabled so they could get help, but they couldn't even meet the requirements. We made it easier by having, if you had a substance abuse disorder, we just made the definition broader so it was easier to do. And what's sad about watching so many of those people on the corner who are clearly disabled and disturbed is you don't want to see them die with their rights on. You want to see them get help. And how do you get that help? Well, a conservatorship helps, because for so many of them, and I'll tell you this as somebody who worked with the chronically homeless for a long time, so many of them, once they start taking medication, start making more rational decisions. They do realize, oh gosh, I take my medication, I feel better, I make better decisions, I want to be in housing. All those things come from having worked, and I understand that from having worked, trying to get them to come in. I think the city has a very great opportunity to do a lot on this. I do think it comes with having a partnership with the county. We should look at our allies over there. We shouldn't even be considering litigation exempt as a last result. And you asked earlier about talents and skills that I have. I've always been able to get complicated issues worked on. I have been able to utilize the relationships that I've had and made over the course of my career. And I do want to bring that down to partnership with the county. We shouldn't have to be adverse to the county. We shouldn't have to fight the county. All the money that would go into legal fees fighting the county would be much better spent giving to provide services and housing to our homeless population. That's where I'd like to see it go. So I intend, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, I intend to work hard with our partners over at the county to avoid litigation. Let's put the dollars into actual services.
So I feel like we should address the 101 Ashbury situation. That debacle has become a notorious example of corruption and government mismanagement. For those who do need a refresher, that is the high-rise that the city acquired in 2017, hoping to move in hundreds of city employees. City employees did briefly move in, but then they were evacuated due to asbestos issues. And there were lots of questions about how the city ended up with this lemon of a building. We eventually learned that the city's volunteer real estate consultant quietly made millions of dollars on this transaction and another before it. The current city attorney, Mara Elliott, signed the 101 Ash Street lease, but she was not in office when the process was going through for the lease to be approved by the city council. And she actually later aggressively went after Jason Hughes, the guy who made millions of dollars, and Sestera, the one-time owner of the building. Yeah, the city is the owner. Opposed a city settlement to actually acquire the two buildings, 101 Ash Street and Civic Center Plaza building, which ended up coming up in this debacle as well. So my question, and I'll start with Heather on this one, how would you evaluate the city attorney's approach to this whole situation, and what would you have done differently?
As we talked about earlier, solving problems, especially sometimes ones created by the politicians, is what the city attorney's office has to do. And I think that's exactly what we saw with the current city attorney. She inherited a problem and it became worse and worse. Having the independence and having the legal knowledge and experience to have those conversations publicly, to issue memos to make sure that the people who held the authority for the decision, that was the council in the case of the settlement, for example, is incredibly important. And I think that that is a model that should be followed, and it's one that even the city auditor identified when they evaluated the 101 Ash Street evaluation, that there should be a public legal memo on the legal work that has been done. And that is the model that we saw just come out with Kettner and Vine, which I'm not saying is a 101 Ash, but is a it's a big property transaction of an expensive building for a long time that has the potential to affect our city for years and years beyond any current elected official's term, and even those of us who will be elected into office this year. So having that public transparency, those public memos, and those dialogues is incredibly important to preventing 101 Ash type transactions in the future. And I believe the other way to do that is actually having the legal knowledge on these property transactions. I spent 7 years negotiating complex property transactions for the San Diego Housing Commission. We made sure that public housing, which is sort of an archaic thing now, was actually protected and preserved, and that the Housing Commission had money to make sure that housing didn't fall apart, that it wasn't uninhabitable, that they had the money to reinvest, to keep families housed and safe in them. And it was an incredibly important and complicated legal transaction that I'm proud to have worked on to protect 1,300 housing units in the city of San Diego.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, this is 101 Ash is, of course, the poster child, but it's really more than that. There's been 4 to 5 terrible legal issues for the city, and land deal after real estate. The city has always taken the brunt of it. And my opponent has said that she is the liaison between, she's the one who advises the council on these decisions. She is the one who prepares the legal research, the legal memorandums for them to base their decision. And so and that her experience and her work in the office is why she should be city attorney. It's hard for somebody who's just, well, what does that mean? How do we see what that work is? And so I actually took exact quotes, so I got them right. I didn't try to paraphrase, but there was an independent audit done of not just Ash Street, but all the other land deals. And here's what the independent audit said about the work that was done on this. Here's 3 quotes. The city attorney's office did not communicate the legal risks presented in the contracts to acquire buildings, resulting in decision makers lacking crucial information when weighing the pros and cons of these multi-million-dollar acquisitions. Second, the city attorney's office did not raise any concerns in writing regarding these legal risks. Third, the city attorney's office did not disclose these legal risks to council members. That's not me saying this. This is an independent audit saying that's what happened between the city attorney's office and the council. Incredibly, they bought a building that's going to cost the city over $100 million and did not inspect the building. Incredibly. Think about any large purchase. I think if you bought a car, the salesman tells you the engine's great. Yeah, everything's great. It's a wonderful car. Yeah, here's $30,000. Here's $40,000. Don't look under the hood. Don't look under. Of course, you would look under the hood. That didn't happen in this case. And you want to talk. There's going to be a ton of panels here today. Probably you guys are all going to go. People in here are going to split out and go. So you have panels on affordable housing. There's going to be panels on homelessness. There's going to be panels on transit. Every dollar that's going into Ash Street, just Ash Street, which we're looking at now into hundreds, over $100 million on that one, skipping all the other ones. Any dollar would be better spent on any of the panels that you're going to. This independent audit, it's not anyone who's running for office saying it. It's the auditor saying this. This is what happened. There wasn't proper legal advice. The person advising the council did not give them the proper legal advice. This has happened not just in Ash Street, but in land deal after land deal after land deal.
I like that they're fine. I think this again shows my opponent's lack of understanding of the city attorney's office. The city attorney's office contains 170 attorneys providing legal work on, yes, very complicated land transactions and a lot of other things. And this is not the first time that there's been an insinuation made that I was somehow involved in the legal work on 101 Ash. It was not. I had recently started with the office when 101 Ash was negotiated. I was working with our Parks and Recreation Department on making sure First Amendment rights of our park goers were protected and making sure that tennis clubs and other groups could utilize park properties. I was not involved in 101 Ash at all. And so any insinuation that that is the case is just a lie. And I agree with the audit. I agree that there wasn't legal work that should have been done and that due diligence was not declared and considered by the council when that property was purchased. And that is the problem that we're in. And I think that that's why it's incumbent on the next city attorney to not only have the experience in property transactions, but to be committed to making sure that we call that out publicly and not waffle on it just because maybe our friends are the ones who are making the deal.
So we have been in the midst the past several years of a devastating drug overdose crisis, and fentanyl has been at the center of it. I am first off wondering what you both would do to try to address that crisis, and then I'd also like you to say, if Prop 36 passes, how do you think that would impact what the city attorney can do on that crisis? And we'll start with Brian.
Yeah, I think Prop 36 is going to give more tools on fentanyl. It's going to go after one of the kind of undiscussed parts of that is what it, and it's been brought up because it actually isn't discussed, but just what it's going to mean for fentanyl to it. Fentanyl is a killer unlike anything us have ever seen in our lifetime. I mean, many of us who were growing up, it was marijuana, or it was what you talked to your kids about. Now fentanyl, they're getting pills going online to get Xanax, and they're laced with fentanyl, and they're dying, and hundreds of these up and down the state. So we worked really hard to strengthen penalties on the fentanyl dealers. The other thing it will do is it will bring back the ability to take people into drug work. And I think that could have a significant effect on decreasing the incidence we see, because so much of the issues that we see in terms of theft, as we talk about, really does entail paying for fentanyl. And so I'm excited that we're going to have a lot many tools at our disposal and in light of what's out there. And I also look very hard on strengthening. I got to say, has to in other words, against fentanyl for those. We had a package of bills that was shown through the Assembly that gives law enforcement much more to go after these fentanyl dealers who are absolutely manipulated.
Heather.
So Prop 47, when it was adopted many years ago, downgraded felonies, and a lot of them goes into drug use and drug dealing, to misdemeanors. And when that happened, I remember hearing from colleagues concerns about how the city attorney's office, who prosecutes 20,000 plus misdemeanors a year, would absorb that additional work. And there was no funding or anything allocated by that change. So if Prop 36 is successful, it will return many of those misdemeanors back to felonies. That will then fall to the district attorney's office here in the city of San Diego, and the city attorney's office will no longer be responsible for those. I support the public safety changes in Prop 36, and I absolutely support the diversion programs. I think they're critically important, but I'm very concerned, just like when 47 was passed, that the legislative analyst has pointed out there is no funding tied to these diversion programs that are mandated by the bill, by the proposition. And that tends to be where local government struggles the most, is when there are new obligations put on local government, but no funding to go with them. And these programs are great ideas, but I'm concerned that my opponent, while he was at the legislature, didn't think about how we were going to pay for new diversion programs and drug court if this were to be successfully passed by the voters, because it is a concern on how are we going to administer it. I think there's other things the city attorney's office should be looking at in terms of public safety, including pioneering and continuing to expand the use of gun violence restraining orders and continuing to hold people accountable when they try to defraud the government and things like that. So.
Well, now we're going to move into questions from you all. So now is the time. If you have questions, please raise your hand and you can fill out a note card. So we'll start that. But first up, we're going to have a question from Emily Brewer, who's an Eric Price Fellow. So just a little background on that program. Each year, the Price Fellows program selects 40 kind, inquisitive, open-minded ninth graders from a pool of 300 applicants for a 3-year journey. They go behind the scenes to see how cities function, explore the role of community members in shaping society, and develop empathy and skills for navigating a diverse world. The program is a high school leadership experience started in 1991 by the Price family, and the mission is to prepare a highly motivated and diverse group of San Diego Public High School students to be responsible, engaged, and caring members of the community. Today, there are over 1,000 Aaron Price Fellows alumni, with 500 locally carrying out the mission of the program by making a difference in their families, careers, and communities. Emily, would you like to come up and ask the first question?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Emily Brewer, and I'm a student at Local Country Day. My question is, in 2022, the city attorney's office filed suit against more than 20 telephone companies in order to fund the cleanup process for toxic chemicals found in San Diego water. This month, hydrogen cyanide, the toxic gas, was detected in the air near Imperial Beach. What are some ways you will protect communities to prevent further health hazards, such as these that are steadily becoming more common? Thank you.
We can start with Heather.
Okay. So one of the really important roles of the city attorney's office is our affirmative civil enforcement unit, and the city attorney can act on behalf of our community and our environment by taking action. The city attorney's office recently successfully received a settlement against Firestone Walker for illegally dumping hazardous materials from their operations into our waterways. And taking action on the Tijuana sewage emergency is critically important. I am proud to be endorsed by Imperial Beach Mayor Paloma Aguirre, too, to take action on this issue. And so I'm looking forward to working together to see what kinds of civil enforcement protections are out there to address that concern in the South Bay. But I'm also very interested in wanting to expand the role of our civil enforcement team to go after companies who are taking advantage of breaking the laws to increase their bottom line.
Brian.
Yeah, we agree here. I think there's a huge role for the city attorney to work on environmental enforcement. I'm very proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club. I think we have a lot of assets here in San Diego that the city attorney can partner with. Sierra Club, Legal Defense Fund, there's a whole host of people with real legal talent, real skills in these areas that I'd like to see the city be proactive on and working with. But it's a great tool for the city attorney's office to have to make sure that we're holding these companies to be environmentally responsible.
If you haven't turned in your note card yet and you have one, please raise your hand and Tigus will collect it, and Tigus will hand me the question. Yeah.
Yes.
The first question here is about Public Records Act requests. The question is, why does changing this further require a new department and not just better guidance and training to city departments? I'll start with Brian on that one.
Yeah, I think it just requires better guidance rather than, I don't think it needs an entire department. The Public Records Requests Act is very straightforward. It's been in existence for a long time. All these other jurisdictions have been able to comply with it without creating a department. As long as the city, I don't know whether I don't think it needs a department. Either way, what I can assure you is if I'm elected city attorney, we will be complying with Public Records Act requests. The days of hiding documents and the days of losing these lawsuits will definitely be over.
Heather.
There's no requirement for a department, but a department could be helpful in having specialist knowledge for the people who are looking at the request, for staying on top of the requests. A lot of our departments have staff rotate through responding to public records act requests, which makes it challenging for anyone to build up the experience in how to identify documents that are actually responsive. I'm not sure how many of you have filed a Public Records Act request and then gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails that that have a trigger word in them, but don't really speak to what you're looking for. And so having staff trained on the specific documents that exist in the city and what Frequent Records Acts are asking for could really speed up the process. I think it would improve transparency. It's not required, but I think it would be a best practice, and it would absolutely help prevent lawsuits that sometimes can't be avoided. I think the legal advice is sound most of the time, and I would make sure that we are doing adequate training in the city attorney's office as well as among staff to ensure that as changes in the law occur and as issues come up with every lawsuit, that we are having those conversations to address them and try to prevent them next time.
The next question is, what have you done to work on preventing gun violence? Do you have any experience with gun violence restraining orders? I'll start with Heather, and if you could define that for everyone too, I figured I could count on you to define it.
Yeah, so our current city attorney, Mara Elliott, has been a pioneer on the use of gun violence restraining laws. They are restraining orders. They are temporary restraining orders that can be issued by a court when there is an individual who has a firearm and there is evidence that that person poses a threat to themselves or others. It is highly effective in preventing mass shootings, school shootings, suicide, and domestic violence escalation. So it's something that the current city attorney established. She's a nationwide leader on this. It's a critical tool to keeping our community safe, and one that I want to see us expand into the future in the office, along with other types of restraining orders that help keep our community safe, whether those are workplace violence restraining orders, domestic violence restraining orders, really all of the fancy legal term restraining order, all it means is a temporary taking away of something, whether that's stay away from a place or removal of the firearms. There is a process to recover the firearms, so it is not a Second Amendment violation. That person can go back to the court and try and get their firearms back after the situation has passed or if work has been done, depending on the reason why the person had the restraining order was issued in the first place. So yeah, I think that's a bad question.
So you
Absolutely support it.
and do you have experience with working on them?
Not
Preventing gun violence.
Well, I've been working in the office for 10 years, and I'm excited to continue to work forward on this issue. I don't have significant experience in that role. My role has been more focused on property and real estate and housing and homelessness issues in the office currently, but I am, I work well with the team that exists working on gun violence restraining orders. I'm excited to do more. I do work with our Family Justice Center, which is another area that the city attorney operates to keep communities safe. It's a one-stop shop for survivors of domestic violence, and they have a very critical role to play in gun violence restraining orders as well. There was recent state law that requires people be told about their right to pursue a restraining order if they're in a domestic violence situation and there's a firearm in the relation available to the abuser, and so it's a really important tool to keep people safe.
Brian.
And I appreciate that. That was my bill, so I appreciate that. I've worked hard in this area in the assembly. I think we agree how important it is. I'm really proud that in the last budget cycle, I was able to get $2 million from the state directed to the city attorney's office to expand this program. I'm proud that I've been named a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action, San Diego's for gun violence prevention. This is a critical role for the city attorney to do to help get these guns off the street. The bill that I believe she was citing was to keep if you're convicted of a crime involving violence towards the elderly or towards children, you shouldn't have a gun. I mean, you've shown, and by definition, you're not the type of person that should be having a gun. And so I was able to get that bill through, and as a way to expand the people that we can go out, make sure that they aren't in possession of a firearm. I also closed the loophole, passed legislation to close the loophole that the gunman at the Chabad in Poway used in order to get his gun. And so I got that loophole closed. I got funding to make places of worship and other high propensity places where gun violence could occur. I got funding to help them create buffers, to help them create appropriate exits. That was one of the big problems at Chabad was difficult to get out because the government started firing, so we got them the money to help them protect themselves. So it's a wide-ranging issue. It starts with giving the individual's hands, but it also includes how do we make sure, sadly, to say, how do we make sure it's a facility and people who use these facilities. You should be able to go to your place of worship with a feeling, or any other community-type place with a feeling of being safe.
So question for both of you. Have you ever prosecuted a criminal trial? Start with Brian.
I have not.
Have you? Want to know. What is your position on the strong mayor form of government? Start with Heller on this.
It's the system that the voters put into place nearly 20 years ago, and it has been very interesting to watch the city adjust to it. I think it's fascinating. The first several mayors, we saw them grow into the role of strong mayor, and I think in the last few city councils, we are seeing them adjust to what a strong mayor means. And I think that actually accounts for more of what my opponent likes to describe as chaos and dysfunction at the city council meetings than anything else. We are seeing a city council appropriately pushing back on a mayoral administration to further their own policy goals. And I think that makes healthy democracy. What I think is important is that the city attorney's office also needs to adjust to the strong mayor form of government. The city attorney has historically taken most of its legal work on the civil side of things from city departments. And that can leave city council members feeling like there's not necessarily a voice for them. And I think that's why we see measures sometimes come up about dividing the office and having appointed counsel. And I think there are ways to work with the council to stop that from happening, to close that loop, that gap. And it just means a shift that hasn't been analyzed by any of the city attorneys since strong mayor form of government came into being, and I think it's time.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time we had a city manager form of government, had benefits that people cite, it definitely had problems that people cite. The voters did change to a strong mayor form of government, so that's what we have, unless the voters decide they want to change back. I think at its heart, fundamentally, the idea of having somebody you can elect was a good thing. I mean, if you would have asked city residents of the city of San Diego to name the current city manager at the time, and I'm guessing these are people here, by definition, you're all politically engaged, probably couldn't name a city manager, right? But you can name the mayor. So you have the opportunity with the mayor and the council to vote in or vote out the mayor based on whether you like his or her policies. So, ultimately this one's up to the voters to decide anyway. I think like anything, I mean, I think the system as it is what the city attorney's office has to navigate. And so they do have to navigate a situation where the mayor and the council have certain policy issues and powers that they're able to focus on. And it's a city, if you want to be an effective city attorney, you're going to have to navigate whatever the current system is. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's up to the voters.
So I'm going to sum up one of the questions that we got. There's a question about the surveillance ordinance and mention of the fact that this past summer, during Pride or ahead of Pride weekend, the police used a piece in that ordinance for exigent circumstances to respond pretty quickly and move forward with putting up surveillance in Hillcrest because of concerns of hate crimes. And the person asks, do you believe that it's appropriate for the police to have the power to cite exigent circumstances and quickly deploy that technology? Or do you think that use of that violates the spirit of the ordinance and should be looked at? I'll start with Heather.
Balancing the privacy rights and the ability for law enforcement to respond is always going to be challenging. And I think in that circumstance, there were active threats of hate crimes. Hate crimes had occurred. There was somebody out there with a pellet gun shooting at people, and that was weeks before Pride. And so I understand the police department's concern about the amount of people who gather in Hillcrest during Pride to celebrate, and the need to make sure that they were safe. So I wasn't involved in that specific legal analysis, but I know that the city attorney's office works closely with the police department, and it should be that way. Whenever the police department, or any department for that matter, is working on using surveillance technology and using an exception to the surveillance ordinance, should be very carefully looked at, should be narrow, should be limited, and it should address the exigent circumstance, which in this case were the hate crimes and the concern about the influx of people into the area. So I support generally very narrow exceptions to that ordinance if it's intended to keep people safe. And I think at the end of it, it should go away. They should remove the surveillance again once the concern has passed, once the exigent circumstances are over.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very tricky balancing act. How do you balance the very real need to get somebody who's a clear threat, a very dangerous person off the streets, versus what the public has a right to, which is a privacy right? I don't support the police deciding on their own when that exists. I think there needs to be supervision. So the times are when they're appropriate, and there are definitely times when they're appropriate. This is simply when it was. But it's also not overused just to prevent a police department on their own to sort of have a blanket surveillance. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's appropriate. And so I think, and by the way, when it's exigent circumstances, the definition is it does come down automatically. I do think, of course, the city attorney should make sure it comes down. But by definition, it comes down. So ultimately, I think there's a definite role for it. I just wouldn't have let the police on their own be comfortable with the police on their own deciding when it exists.
Last question for us. So to provide some context for this one, the city has a law on the books that bans habitating in a vehicle, which means sleeping overnight in a vehicle. And there has been a recent settlement that dictates how this enforcement can go forward. So the question was, what is your stance on people sleeping in their cars? I'll start with Brian.
Yeah, I mean, there is a settlement on that, so that's going to ultimately guide the legal issues. I'll go back to what I said earlier, as somebody who has worked with the Department of Homelessness. I don't think they should be criminalized. It's not ultimately going to do anything to end the problem. Somebody who's sleeping in their car has a reason, and it's almost assuredly very unfortunate for two mothers sitting in one car. So ticketing your way out of this or criminalizing your way out of this is not going to work. What's going to work at the end of the day is having the housing in place, the services in place, for the really long-term chronically homeless, to have case managers in place to do something about it and actually resolve it, as opposed to sort of kicking the can.
Heather? I actually worked on both that lawsuit and the law that is at issue in it. And they've also worked on the city safe parking options, which is the alternative to being ticketed for some of these rules. I agree that we should not be criminalizing homeless, and that vehicles are often where seniors and families resort when there's a job loss or a medical bill and they can't pay rent, in addition to whatever that economic circumstance might be. And the city needs to expand on safe parking. It's hugely successful. It usually means those people are easier to house and they can find housing alternatives fairly quickly, and we see it very successful with the partners the city works with. So I fully support expansion of safe parking. When there are requests from the mayor, the council, the departments to write laws, that is what the city attorney's office does, and that is what I did in that instance. And then when the earlier law had been sued upon for being vague and several other issues, the city attorney's office vigorously defended it to preserve the policy direction of the city. So it is an important role, and so my personal beliefs, while I would always prefer shelter and safe parking options, I do the legal work, and I do the legal work for the city, and I will continue to do the legal work for the city. And I would encourage people who are unhappy with the policy direction of the city to bring that up with their council members and their mayor and vote in those races, because those are the people who get to decide those things.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up here. We'll have a word from Tiggis Lane here in a moment, but please join me in thanking the candidates.